Corruption Exposed. Episode 1. The One Big Beautiful Bill. How they sold it to us. In December 2017, President Donald Trump signed what he called a big, beautiful Christmas gift to the American people: the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act. At the signing ceremony, he stood before the cameras, flanked by grinning lawmakers, and declared that ordinary Americans would finally get the tax relief they deserved. This was how the law was sold to us: patriotic, historic, and fair. A gift to the middle class. A job creator. A boost to American workers. It was wrapped in red, white, and blue. But under the wrapping paper, things weren't quite what they seemed. Republicans touted it as the most significant overhaul of the tax code in 3 decades. They said it would simplify the system and put more money in your pocket. Democrats called it a scam. Media outlets gave it wall-to-wall coverage. And most Americans, regardless of political party, didn't have the time or resources to read the 500-plus page bill themselves. Instead, they relied on what they were told. Let's start with how the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act was presented to the public: the messaging, the branding, the carefully crafted language. Because in Washington, a bill isn't just written. It's marketed. And this one had the full force of the Republican PR machine behind it. President Trump called it a middle-class miracle. Paul Ryan said it was about helping the people who are striving every day. Mitch McConnell promised it would not only cut taxes but also raise wages and grow the economy. The official name, the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, was rejected by the Senate parliamentarian. So lawmakers used an alternative name for procedural purposes: to provide for reconciliation pursuant to Titles II and V of the concurrent resolution on the budget for fiscal year 2018. But that didn't matter. What stuck in the public's mind was what they were told over and over again: this was a tax cut for you. The White House released slick infographics. Republican lawmakers held town halls and went on Fox News to promote the bill's benefits. One congressman even used a whiteboard to show how a fictional family of 4 would save thousands. It all looked good, on paper. But let's pause here and ask a question. How many people actually saw their paychecks increase in 2018? And of those who did, how many knew why? For many workers, the difference was so small it went unnoticed. A few extra dollars per week, maybe enough to buy a coffee or 2. Meanwhile, the top 1% and large corporations were set to receive hundreds of billions in tax relief over the next decade. Still, the headlines kept coming. Tax cuts bring jobs back to America. Wages rising under Trump's tax plan. Middle-class relief at last. But these headlines were often based on selective data, short-term snapshots, or industry press releases. For example, AT&T announced it would give $1,000 bonuses to workers and invest $1 billion in infrastructure, citing the tax bill as the reason. What wasn't reported as widely was that weeks later, the company laid off thousands of workers. Another example: Walmart raised its starting wage and handed out bonuses. But those bonuses were one-time payments, while the company quietly closed 63 Sam's Club stores on the same day. These moves were framed as proof that the tax cuts were working. But in reality, they were part of much larger corporate strategies, timed perfectly to make the tax bill look like a success. The American people were told this law would pay for itself. That the economy would grow so much, it would offset the $1.9 trillion cost. That hasn't happened. Not even close. In fact, according to the Congressional Budget Office, the law added significantly to the national deficit. And most of the permanent benefits went to corporations, not working families. But back in late 2017 and early 2018, few Americans were aware of these details. They saw the smiling politicians. They heard the words relief, and growth, and jobs. They trusted, or at least hoped, that it was true. That's the power of political messaging. When you have the media, the money, and the microphone, you don't have to sell the truth. You just have to sell the version people want to hear. And in part 2, we'll look at what was actually inside the bill. Because while the wrapping may have looked patriotic, the contents told a very different story.